If you run a thought experiment right now, everyone watching this video could go out and easily jog a kilometer and be completely unscathed. But if we took that same kilometer and we broke it up into 10 100-meter sprints all out with 15 to 20 minutes between those reps, clearly there's going to be a lot of torn hamstrings and potential other injuries. And this is because there is an exponential increase in injury risk as we increase exercise intensity. What's up guys, this is Keir from Strength Coach Network. Today I want to talk to you about one of the most useful mental frameworks that I use whenever I try to analyze sporting demands or develop training programs. And this is what I call the SPP focused approach. SPP stands for specific physical preparation, but you can pretty much interchange this term with the dominant actions of the sport. And basically what we're trying to do when we define SPP is to identify the set point that we're working backwards from in terms of all of the training decisions that we make. So I want you to ask yourself the following questions, either for yourself as an athlete or for the athletes that you program for. The first one is, what is it that makes you most tired? Which events make you most tired during the course of a competition? Second is, what skills do you perform with the most frequency or the most impact to the outcome of the game within the context of your position? Third is, what poses the biggest non-contact injury risk to you as the athlete? And the fourth is, what is it that you specialize in, that you do better than anyone else, or what you make your living doing as an athlete? And the answer to all four, or a combination of these questions, is going to be what SPP or the dominant actions are for your sport or position, and the lens through which you need to pass your subsequent analysis and programming decisions. So why take this approach? Why does it matter? Well, the first thing is, it's not the low intensity stuff that is making people tired during competition. If we think about rugby, it's the tackling, the rucking, the mauling, the scrummaging, carrying the ball through contact, sprinting in support that is making guys tired. It is not the standing around, hands on hips, waiting for the next line out, the next scrum. It's not the low intensity jogging as we just reposition to perform these high intensity skills that's making us tired. It's those high intensity movements that I just mentioned. The second is, from a tactical perspective, low intensity activities do not have any real impact on the outcome of the game. Being the first person to arrive at a ruck or a maul where you subsequently get destroyed by the opposition does not make for an effective rugby player. Obviously, you do need to get there. There is a low intensity component to the sport, but what we find is if you raise up those high intensity outputs, the low ones follow them in their wake. The reverse is not true. If you concentrate on being the best low intensity athlete on the field, you are not necessarily going to raise those high intensity outputs, and you're not going to be an effective athlete. So what we have to do is get the big rocks in place first, and that is high intensity dominant actions and concentrating on increasing those above all else. And of course, the third is that low intensity actions are not causing injuries. If we want to achieve nothing else as strength coaches, we have to increase availability. Availability is the best ability, and we want to make sure that athletes are robust and healthy to what it is that's causing injuries on the field. If you run a thought experiment right now, everyone watching this video could go out and easily jog a kilometer and be completely unscathed. But if we took that same kilometer and we broke it up into 10 100-meter sprints all out with 15 to 20 minutes between those reps, clearly there's going to be a lot of torn hamstrings and potential other injuries. And this is because there is an exponential increase in injury risk as we increase exercise intensity. So if we want to try and manage preventable injuries, it makes sense that we need to make athletes robust to the actions that are causing these injuries, namely high intensity dominant actions. So what are some real world examples? Let's look at the sport of American football. Using this criteria, I would say that the dominant actions for offensive linemen is going to be blocking and lateral movement. For defensive linemen, it's going to be pass rushing and tackling. For linebackers, accelerating and tackling. For running backs, it's going to be accelerating and cutting. Maybe we could include carrying the ball through contact, but the best way to gain yardage is to not get tackled in the first place. DBs, sprinting and tackling. Wide receivers, sprinting and cutting. Tight ends and fullbacks is going to be accelerating and blocking. For QBs, it's obviously going to be throwing, and it may be accelerating or lateral movement depending on the style of the quarterback that's playing. And lastly, for the kickers, it's in the name. So what we can do is evaluate these movements using Professor Verkhoshansky's criteria of dynamic correspondence. We can look at the range of motion, the magnitude and direction of force, the muscles used, the contact time available, the angular velocity of the segments involved, if there is a region of peak force production within that range of motion, and we can look at the regime of muscular work, so the contraction type. And having done this, we can now come up with a list of exercises which are more or less specific relative to what would be termed the competition exercise by Bondarchuk, but just these dominant actions. So we can come up with our general preparatory exercises, our specialized preparatory, our specialized developmental, and our competition exercises. And now we have a framework to establish what should be emphasized earlier in the preparation or the career and later in the preparation or the career, so that we can keep the athlete improving for as long as possible and keep those aces up our sleeve in the form of highly specific exercises. Understanding the dominant actions of a sport or position is also going to allow us to more intelligently select assessments and weight these according to their relative importance for a position. For example, if we know that offensive linemen, the dominant action in their position is going to be blocking, we're obviously going to weight more heavily an assessment that favors upper body strength, where they have to overcome a lot of mass. So for example, a 1RM bench press, as opposed to a fly 10, which might be an important assessment for a wide receiver or a cornerback. Understanding these dominant actions is also going to provide us with the opportunity to more easily define the time motion demands of the sport. So rather than looking at the totality of the game and random things like heart rate data or GPS, we can actually watch film and look for these high intensity actions that punctuate the game. So we can ask ourselves, how many times do these dominant actions occur throughout the course of an average game? How long do these actions last when they take place? What is the typical rest between these high intensity actions? If they get a big rest, how often does it happen? How long does it last for? And what is the relative distribution or ratio of these activities throughout a game? For example, we know that X position has to perform 20 or 30 sprints in a game, but only 10 to 15 tackles. That would be an example. And once we're able to understand the nature, the quantity, and the organization of these high intensity dominant actions that an athlete has to perform in a game or in a training camp scenario, that provides us with an endpoint that we have to work backwards from in order to get athletes ready and robust to that. One of the major failings of camp in American football, in my opinion, is that we do a really poor job of understanding what it is that we're getting guys ready to do and preparing them to face that typically during camp, because that's going to be the most intense period of the year. And it's this gap between what they have to be ready for and what we prepare them for that athletes fall into and get hurt, and that is why week one of camp tends to be such a disaster. And this is exactly the approach that I've tried to take when I've worked with college athletes. We looked at a typical spring ball practice, looked at the dominant actions that were taking place, and we created a theoretical worst case scenario that guys needed to be robust to during camp, which was 6 of those practices back to back with a Sunday off. Now, obviously, the volumes that you're going to see in camp that they have to be robust to in camp are way beyond what most people would consider to be optimal for the development of speed, strength, power, and all those other outputs that we love so much. So rather than concentrating on just trying to increase those outputs and crossing our fingers that guys are going to be robust when they get to camp, we actually spent the bulk of June and July just accumulating volume in these dominant actions to ensure that whatever volume of work they were going to be asked to do theoretically in week one of camp, we'd actually done that before camp, so that once they get into that camp environment, that it doesn't constitute an increase in load. It's hopefully just business as usual. In reality, it's probably not the case because of the additional emotional load, heat, pads and helmets and so on, but we wanted to get as close as possible. And just as an aside, I think this is one of the major failings of how college teams typically prepare their football athletes during the summer. We put such a premium on speed, size, strength, power, and developing these qualities that we adopt a much more lifting-centric preparation as opposed to the accumulation of on-feet activity and high-intensity actions on the field. Clearly, when guys get to camp, if they are getting hurt, it is not due to a lack of weight room exposure. It's definitely going to be the other stuff that is breaking them, and we need to make more of an effort to make guys robust to this. My preference would actually be that if we're trying to make gains in body comp or in these outputs, we're actually doing it in the off season or the period immediately after spring ball. But as we get into May, June, and July, it really is just about preparing for that camp environment and making sure that guys are robust. So this is the SPP focused approach that I personally try and use when I analyze sports and prepare athletes for the competition, and I hope you like it. If there's anything else you would like to see me talk about on this channel, please drop a comment below, and otherwise please like, subscribe, and share. Thanks very much. Congratulations on making it to the end of the video. Why don't you celebrate by watching more just like it? You can also help us on our quest to placate the algorithm gods by liking, sharing, subscribing, and commenting. Thanks.